In this video, I'm going to show you how to build and implement a multi-file input in React that supports uploading multiple files at the same time and also showing visually the progress of each file as it's being uploaded. As always, we're going to be building this using clean and simple code, and we're also going to be following all of the best practices and design patterns when it comes to React. So this should be a great video. You are going to learn a ton, and let's get to it. Alright, so let's begin. So here, I'm first going to start by showing you a demo of what we're going to be building in this video. So here I have our multi-file input, right? I can press select files over here. It's going to trigger my file input. I can select any number of files that I want. Let's put 3. I'm going to select them. And now we can see the files displayed here. We see the title of the files. We see some details of the files, like the size of the file and what type of file it is. And we have these buttons now that became activated once we have some actual files. I can press upload, and it's going to upload each one of them in parallel and show me the progress bar as that is being done, right? I can also then clear all, and it's going to reset our state to allow us to upload our files again. Right, so that's our goal for this video. And now that we've seen what we're aspiring to, let's actually go into the code and let's start building this multi-file input. So this is our starter code that we have currently that we have to work in. Now, by the way, you're going to be able to find all of the code included in this video in a repository that is going to be linked in the description down below in case you want to play around with this yourself. So what we have here is we have our default app component, which is using this file upload component here. This is where we're going to be doing all of our work. This file upload component is currently empty because we haven't written any code in. In here, we're going to put all of the functionality related to building our input. Now, in doing that, you're going to see that we're actually going to be creating multiple subcomponents, so smaller components that are going to come inside of this file here that are going to make up this main file upload component. This is one of the good design patterns to use in React applications, which is to make simple, reusable components that ideally only do one thing, right? They follow the single responsibility principle, and then we compose them together inside of this main file upload component, which gets then used inside of the app component or anywhere else that we want to have file uploads. Cool, so let's begin. Let's actually start implementing our file upload functionality. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to have a state variable to hold our files. As you saw in the demo, we clicked select files, we selected some files, and then we were immediately able to see the files on the screen. That's what we want. And for us to be able to do that, we need to have a state value to hold the files. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to do const, and then I'm going to open up an array here, and I'm going to do files and then set files. And this is going to be equal to use state that I'm going to import from React, and I'm going to give this here an initial value of an empty array. Now, these files here are not going to be the default JavaScript files object that you get from an input. We're actually going to want to store a little bit more information here that we need for our UI. For instance, we're going to want to store the actual progress of the file, so how much of the file has been uploaded, and then also a Boolean that is going to determine whether the file has been uploaded or not, so that we can use that in our UI. So what we need to do is we want to come here and actually create a type, because we are working in TypeScript, that we're going to define as file with progress. So it's very descriptive as to what this is. This one is going to take here an ID, which is going to be of type string. We're going to need to use this to uniquely identify this file. For example, if we want to remove this file or make any updates to one specific file in this state array here, we need the ID. Then the file property here, that is going to be the actual file object from JavaScript that we get directly from the input. And then, as I said, we have our progress and our uploaded booleans here, which we're going to use to show things in our UI. And now with this, we can come here to our useState and we can pass this as the type of our file state here, so that TypeScript knows exactly what files we're actually storing in our state. Cool. Now the next step for us to do is to start creating the input that is going to allow us to select a different amount of files. So first, what I want to do is I want to create here a ref for our input. We're going to need to use this ref to manually go into the input and clear the value as we change the value, because now we have these files here which are going to be stored in state, so that's in memory, that's in React, but the input itself will also keep track of the files that have been selected, and we'll need this input ref to manipulate those files to manually sync them with our files here in case that we need to do that. Now, for the input, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come here and actually create a new component for it, because we want the input to be in a separate component so that, again, it follows the best practices in React and it follows the single responsibility principle. So first, we're going to define the type of our file input, right? The props that it's going to receive. So let me just import this change event here from React, and then I'm going to go over what this type actually is. So our file input component is going to receive the following props. The first one is going to be this input ref over here, which is going to directly be this ref that we created here. We're going to pass this to the component, and this component is going to pass it to the actual HTML input element. And then we're also going to have this take in a disabled boolean so that we can disable the input, for example, when we're currently in the progress of uploading some files, right? We don't want the input to be usable when we're actually uploading the files that have been selected. That is a decision that we're making for the user experience of our application. And then we have the callback on file select that we're going to pass to the on change of the input, which we're going to use to actually get access to the files of the input, which are then going to get stored inside of this files state variable here. So let's now create our component. I'm just going to put the UI for the component and just import this icon over here that we need. And there we go. And now we have our file input component, and maybe let's make this a little bit smaller so we can actually see the whole component as we're working with it. So we have the file input component. It receives the props that we've defined up top, and then it just creates one HTML input tag. It passes here the type as file. We're passing the ref to it as the ref property. On change, we're passing on file select. We're setting this to be a multiple input so that we allow multiple files. We're not doing anything with the validation of the files. That's not the point of this video. We're keeping things simple. Then we're passing here a class name of hidden. So this is Tailwind classes. This is essentially going to make it display none because we actually wanted the label for it here to act as the trigger, as the button for our input. And that we're doing by setting this ID property here as FileUpload, which is the same ID that we have here in HTML4. And then we're passing disabled to the disabled property over here of the input. And then our label is very simple. It has, as I said, the HTML4, and then some class names just to make it look like a button a little bit, and then an icon, and then select files so we know exactly what this label is supposed to do. Great, so now with this, we can actually take our input and come here and place it inside of the body of this main component here, right? So we're creating small components and then we're composing them together in this main component that is the only component that is going to be exported from this specific file. And we're choosing to do this, just if you're curious, because this file input is only ever going to be used inside of the file upload component. If we were to use this file input component somewhere else, then we would put it in its own file and then export it everywhere that we want to have it used. But in our case, it's only for this main file upload component, so it's easier to put it in the same file, not export it, and just export the main component, which will include it. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start creating some markup over here just to keep things simple, and let cursor kind of figure it out. Let's just put it like this for now. And there we go. Now we have our file input here inside of a couple of divs. I just put here a header 2 that says file upload. And then here I put flex and gap 2 because we are going to be putting more things in here like the other buttons that you saw in the demo. So that's why I'm setting up the UI, the markup here to support that. So we have our file input component, and as you can see, Cursor, the AI that's helping me, actually went ahead and completed all of the props so that we don't have any type errors, even though we haven't yet built some of these props like disabled and on file select. It put the input ref over here as the input ref, which, by the way, if you're using React 19 or over, you can just pass ref here. You don't have to put a different name. This is because in this project, I'm not yet using React 19, so I can't do that. But if you are, it's totally fine. Then we hard-coded disabled as false, which we are going to change, and then we provided an empty function to on file select. And now if you go and look at the application, you can already see that we have some of the application currently working. We have this input here. I can click it. I can select any amount of files over here that I want, and I can select the files, but nothing is happening. Those files are not yet stored in state in memory. They are stored on the input, but because it is hidden, we're actually not seeing them. So now we actually have to create the function that is going to take those files, store them in our state, and then display them. So what we need to do is we need to come here inside of the main body of this file upload, and I'm going to do function handle file select, this one is going to take in the event, which is going to be a change event of HTML input element. That is going to be the exact same signature that we have over here, right? It matches completely because we're going to be passing this function as the props of this component. And in here, we're now going to be able to take the files from the actual input and store them in our state. So the first thing that we want to do is we first want to make a check that if we don't currently have any files, right, then we just return because we don't want to do anything if we don't have any files. In some cases, you might want to clear this files array here in state if you don't have any files. In case you had files previously, we're not going to bother with that. We're going to keep things simple and just do an early return if we don't have any files. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the files from this input because now we guaranteed that we actually have some files, and we're just going to map over each one of them and then store it inside of this files state array here. So that's what this is going to look like. We're going to create an array from e.target.files. This is going to be here a file list object, right, which has all of our files. Then we're going to map over this array, access each individual file, which is going to be the JavaScript file object, and then we're going to pass it here as the file property. Remember, we're putting all of this inside of file with progress over here, so that's this file over here that we're setting. Then we're going to set the progress at 0 because each file will initially start with a progress of 0. That just makes sense. Same for the uploaded. We're going to start with false. And then as the ID, we're going to pass the file.name because usually in most operating systems, you cannot have a file with the same name. And so that can serve as a unique identifier for the specific file. And then now that we have our new files over here, we can just directly set them in our state by spreading the existing files and then adding all of these new files over here. So now they're going to go directly in our state. And finally, we need to do one more thing, which is we need to actually clear the value of the input itself, because again, it is not automatically going to be in sync with our state. So we need to do that. And that's why we created this ref over here so that we can do ref.current.value and then manually set it to an empty string. Cool. So now with that, we can come here and we can actually replace our function over here with our handle file select. And now as soon as we select our files, they're automatically going to go inside of our state. Now, even if we do that, our files are still not going to show. So I can come in here and I can go to this and I can select any file over here. They're still not going to show anywhere, even if we currently do have them in our state, because we haven't created any component that is actually going to show those files. So that's what we have to do. So for that, I'm going to come here and we're going to want to first create a new component that is going to show all of our files. And for that, we'll need a couple of helper functions, which I can just do here. Let me just import everything that we need. If I can just maybe import all of our missing imports. There we go. We have two simple helper functions, one to get the icon of the file. So based on the meme type or mime type, whatever it's pronounced, of the file, we're going to return a different icon. And similarly, for the file size, we're going to check the file size and just present it in a very nice human readable format. Now, to actually create our file components, we're again going to be following design patterns in React, which means that we're going to create multiple components and compose them together. Again, all in the same file. Our first component is going to be the file list component. This component will receive an array of files with progress, so our enriched state, which has all of the information of the files. It will then also receive a callback for onRemove that is going to get called with the ID of that specific file. We're going to pass this to the individual file component so that we can click X and then remove the file. And then we're also going to track an uploading property to determine if the file is currently uploading, which as you're going to see, we're going to want to disable some of the things in the component. This component is going to look like this. So it is going to be pretty simple. So it is going to be the file list component. It receives the props that we defined above. It first makes a check. If we don't have any files, it just won't return anything because we don't want to have these divs over here in case that we don't have any files. It might mess up the UI a little bit. If we do have files, then we're just going to put here an H3 with a little label that's going to say files. And then we're going to map over every single file. And in here, we're going to create the file item component, which is a separate component that is only going to be responsible for showing and displaying one single file. And we're going to pass all of the props to it: the key, the file, the onRemove, and the uploading property that we have from this component. The file item component, we're going to define it here as well in this same file. So these are going to be its props. It is going to receive one single file file with progress, and is going to receive the same callback and the same uploading boolean, which it is going to consume. Now for that, I'm just going to first create a very small component, which we're going to put here at the bottom. This is just going to be our progress bar. This is a simple progress bar component, right, that only shows the width of the specific thing based on the progress. We're going to need to use this inside of the file item to actually show the individual progress, right? Again, you can take these components and use them as is, or you can take the concepts of these components and just create your components and just use the logic and the teachings from this video and not use the specific code, right? This is meant to teach you how to do it, not necessarily to have you copy exactly the specific way of doing it. So now we can come here and we can create the file item component over here, which will need to import one specific icon. Now we have the file item component. Again, it receives the props that we defined. It is first going to get the icon by using this helper function here, get file icon, which it passes file.file.type. That is going to be a string, and based off of that, we're getting the correct icon. Then we simply have some markup here just to show the actual file. We're showing the icon for the file. We're showing the size of the file by using the format file size, passing file.file.size. And then here, if we're not uploading, we're going to show a button over here with an X that we're going to pass the onRemove as its callback whenever it is clicked, passing the file.id, which we have access to in this component, right? So that's why we needed to pass this uploading prop, because we only want to enable this if we're not currently uploading. Then we have here, if the file is uploaded, right? So that's why we had this property inside of the file with progress state variable. Then we can show here completed. Otherwise, we can show the rounded percentage of the current progress of the upload. And finally, we're passing that progress to our progress bar here so that we can visually see the progress as it's being uploaded. Great. So now with this, we can come back here at the top to our main component here. Remember, this is the main one that is getting exported and the only one that is getting exported. And here, right below this div over here, we can actually put our file list over here. We can pass it here, our files. Here, we're going to need to create the remove file function, which we will. And we also need to create now an uploading state variable that we're going to manage as we're doing the upload. So first, let's come here at the top, and right below our files, we're going to create our state variable uploading with the updater function to set uploading. This is going to have an initial value of false, which we're going to be changing once we actually do our file upload. We're then going to be able to pass it here to the uploading over here, but we also have to come here in the file input and disable the file input if we're currently uploading. Again, we don't want to do anything with the file input if we're currently uploading something. So that's why we need that state variable. And then for this remove file function, the only thing that we need to do is we need to come here and do function and then remove file. It's going to take in an ID as a parameter, and this is going to call set files, and it's going to look at the files and actually filter them and remove the file that has the same ID. Right? So it's a simple function that is simply going to remove a file. And remember, this is going to get called inside of the individual file item component on the X over here. Right? This is this function here. We're passing it through the file list component to the file item component so that it can have access to it. Great. So now with this, we can actually come back to our application, and now we should be able to see a much more interactive and beautiful application. So let's come here. Let's select some files. We're going to select again our 3 files. Now you're going to see that our files are indeed there exactly where we expect them to. And I can also press X over here and remove each file individually one at a time, which demonstrates that our function works and our state works exactly as we expect. Great. So now the only thing left for us to do is to actually finally implement the uploading functionality and make this functional and actually send our files to some backend, because ultimately that's what we want to do. That's what all of this setup here was for, so that we can actually make this working and send the files to our backend. So first, what I want to do is I want to come here right below the file input over here, and we're going to want to create one component, and this is going to be our last component. This is going to be the action buttons component. This component will hold a few of the buttons that we can use to have some actions on our input. For now, we're just going to have uploading and then clearing. We have individual buttons to clear every single file individually, but we should also have a button to clear all files, just so that, we make it easier for the user to not have to click every single file individually, especially if they have a lot of files. This button over here is going to take a disabled property, right? So again, we're going to need to determine when these buttons should be disabled. And for now, we're keeping things simple. We're going to disable all buttons at the same time based on this one prop. That may not be always what you want. In that case, you would maybe create separate components and pass a different disable property to each one. But for our case, we're going to keep things simple and just have one property. And then we're going to have an onUpload callback and then an onClear callback, which again is going to clear every single file. And then our component is actually going to be pretty simple. We'll just need here to import both of our icons here, so the upload and the trash icon. This is going to be a component with just two buttons, one to upload and then one to clear everything. The upload button is going to receive onUpload on click. So whenever we click it, it's going to start the upload. The disable property is coming from that one singular disable prop. And then we have some class names here with the icon and a similar thing with the clear all, except that on click, it is going to call the onClear function. With this, we can now come here and one last time add this to our main component. And we're going to put this right below over here. And this is why now you can see I put flex and gap 2 because I knew that we were going to be adding more buttons here. Right. Now we'll need to have a disable property and we'll need to create these functions here, which are our next steps. Now, in the case of these action buttons here, we actually want to not only disable them if uploading is true, but we also want to disable them if files.length is 0 or uploading, right? So we only want to show this button if we have files and if we're currently not uploading. This is different than this case where the file input should only be disabled if we're uploading. If we don't have any files, we don't want to disable the input, we actually want this input to be clicked, but that's not the same for these action buttons over here. And that's why it's always better to create separate components. That way you can put different properties for the same props. If they receive the same props, you have greater degree of customization and you're more flexible. Now let's first do the handle clear function because that is the simplest one for us to do. So we can come here and we can do function handle clear. And this we're just going to put here set files. Let me just do this as well. We're just going to do the handle clear. We're just going to put set files here to an empty array, and that is going to clear all of the files with a single button click, which is really useful. And finally, we need to create our main upload files functions, which we can call here handle upload, which we can put here just an empty function for now. The first thing that we're going to do is something very similar to what we did here. We're first going to check if we actually have some files or not. If we don't want to do anything, right? So if we don't have any files, or if we're currently uploading, this function here should not be called, right? I think that makes sense. Then what we want to do is we want to set uploading to true, because at this point we have files, so we're ready to start the upload. So we're going to want to mark this state variable here as true so that the rest of our app can actually update and show the different buttons that now we're uploading to true. Then what we're going to want to do is we actually want to do this in parallel. So we're now going to have multiple files that we want to upload. We want to do this in parallel and upload every single file at once, right? Not wait for every single file and then upload the next one, because that would be inefficient. We want to do them at the same time. So the way that we do that is we're going to first create the promises for each one of these files, and then we're going to await all of the promises at the same time at the end of the function. So this is what it's going to look like. We're going to do const upload promises. That is going to be files.map, and then we're going to map over each individual file. And here I'm just going to close the function so that we actually have it working. That is going to be a file with progress. And now for each one of these files, we're going to be able to do some things with it. So first, we're going to create a form data object over here, and inside of it, we're going to append the file here, which is going to be file with progress.file. So again, that is the direct file object that we get from the actual input. We're going to send this through form data. Form data is useful because you can actually send files with it. And I believe that's one of the only ways that you can actually send files inside of a backend. So we need to use form data. And then the next step for us to do is we're going to first create a try catch block here. So I'm just going to make an empty catch block for now. In case of an error, we're just going to console.error the error, right? We're not going to do any fancy thing with the error. We're just going to console log the error, and that's going to be it, right? In a real production application, you probably would want to do something with the error, but that's not our concern and our priority over here. Then inside of our try block, that's where we're actually going to make the fetch to our backend, and that's where we're going to have all of the logic of updating the progress of each specific file as it's being uploaded. So I'm just going to put the starter code for it now. we're going to be using Axios. Now, you don't have to use Axios. I like to use Axios because it makes it really easy to get the actual progress of the uploads. If you're using something else, that's totally fine. You would just have to find and get the different way of getting the upload progress using the specific fetching library that you're using. In our case with Axios, you're going to see it is pretty simple. Now, this endpoint over here is actually a free service. It's a URL that you can go to online that actually receives files through the API, so we can use it completely for free. It's not going to really do anything with the files. It's just great for us because we actually have a real place to send our files to instead of mocking this locally, which I think is better. Then, as the second argument, we're going to pass our form data over here because that is going to be the actual data that we pass to Axios. And then we can create here an object, and let me just close this function here. We can create here an object, and here we can pass some callbacks that is going to allow us to hook into the events of our file upload. So in our case, as cursor is suggesting, we're going to be able to use the onUploadProgress function. And again, this is specific to Axios. That's how they make it really easy. You just have a callback function that gives us access to the progress event, which is going to have everything that we need to calculate the current progress of our file as it's being uploaded. And then we can let cursor here predict pretty much everything because it is pretty simple, right? We can get the progress here by doing a math.round and then using the progress event and getting the amount that is currently loaded, that is going to be a number here, multiplying this by 100 and dividing this by the total amount that is to be uploaded, which in this case is an optional, so we have to pass here a default value of 1, right? There's multiple ways that you can go about this, but this is a pretty standard way. And then we're going to call the set files function. So again, we're going to put this inside of our state. We're going to need to update our state based on this progress value, but here we're going to call the function notation of set state. The reason we're doing this is because this is now going to run in parallel at the same time as other files are being uploaded. So we don't want to have any race conditions or any state that overrides one other state. If you're putting it here inside of a function notation, React is going to schedule all of these updates at a later point in the component lifecycle in the order that they were called, so you can always guarantee that you're going to get the correct order. And then we're going to be taking the previous files, we're going to be mapping over each individual file, and then for each one, we're going to check if the ID is a match with the one that we're currently uploading. If it is, then I'm going to spread the file and then add the progress to it. So we're going to update its progress. Otherwise, we're just going to put the file as is in our state. And that's it. This is now going to run for every single file as soon as it's uploaded, or actually as it's being uploaded, right? Every single time that Axios determines that it should run, it is going to run, and we're going to get automatically the updated values inside of our state with certainty. And then the last thing for us to do is, after all of these have been done, then what we need to do is we need to finally set all of the files over here. We're going to be setting every single file. We're going to go and set the uploaded to true on every single file, because now we're determining that the file upload has been complete and there's nothing else for us to do, right? So this here is going to run for each individual file as it's being uploaded, but because we're awaiting this Axios.post, this line over here is only going to be done once the request has been fully finished. So then we're actually going to upload that file. And actually, I realize I said we're going to do that for every single file. We're not. This is still running inside of the single file. That was my mistake. This is running for one single file because, again, we're inside of this main map statement here, right? This is for one single file. So this is running as the file itself is being uploaded, and this one is after the file has been uploaded because we are awaiting this Axios.post. Now it's clear. Great. So now we have our upload promises. These are promises that are just created. They're not yet actually run and executed. For that, we need to come here at the bottom, and what we need to do is we need to come in here and we need to await promise.all and then upload all of these promises, which also means that we need to come here and make this into an asynchronous function so that we can do that. And then after that, we're going to set is uploading to false, because at that point, the upload has been finished. This over here, await promise.all, is going to schedule and run all of these promises at the same time in parallel, which is what is going to get for us the most efficient performance. And that's it. With this, we've actually completed our file upload functionality. So now we can actually see this in action and see how this works and if this works, right? So we have here our extra buttons, upload and clear all. They're currently disabled, right? Because we're not currently uploading and we don't have any files, but our input button here is enabled, which is what we want. Now, if you come come here and we select some files over here, we can select again our first three. We're getting the same files just like we had before. Everything still works. Now these buttons are enabled here, which is great. We can now press upload, and now this is going to upload every single one of our files. And again, you see I have a pretty fast internet, so this was very fast. But now we have our files here and they are completed. You can see, maybe because of my face you can't see the bottom one, but you can see here the top one. They're all the same, they're all completed, and everything works exactly as we expect. We can now press the clear all button, which is going to clear all of them and update our state exactly as we expect. And our file upload is working perfectly and there doesn't seem to be any issues, which is great. And there you go. That's pretty much all of the code that you need to get a multi-file input with upload progress component working. Now, I do want to mention that, of course, there's going to be multiple ways that we could have done this, right? We could have structured this completely different, even if we wanted to have the same functionality. What I tried to do in this video was also spend a little bit of time on the adjacent things to building a file input, which were more like React related things, like creating small components, having one main export component, right, that is composed of multiple components. We could have done this and put all of this in one component. It would have been a big mess. I generally prefer to do things this way, because you end up having a lot of small composable components, which is really how React was meant to be used. And I think that that is valuable as a React developer to not only be able to build the file input functionality, which you now know how to do, but also to know how to structure components to build it in the most efficient way that follows clean code and all of the good design patterns. So there you go. I think that we did a pretty good job. Once again, you're going to be able to find this exact code in a repository. It's going to be linked in the description. I highly recommend that you play around with this to get a feel for it and really practice your skill of creating components, because it really is a skill. And I promise you, it is going to go a long way for you and you're going to become a much better React developer. So there you go. That's it. That's all that I had for this video. If you enjoyed this video, of course, leave it a big thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you thought of the video. I would love to read and have a chat with you. And yeah, my name has been Darius Kozin. This is Kozin Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.